Okay, good morning, those of you watching. We're just, why is it giving me the wrong title? It says you're Jim Wright.
I'm not.
I know. He's taller. Now all righty. It looks like Yahoo! We're live. All righty. So, guys, give me just a second to push a couple of buttons. I am my own director, and
This meeting is being recorded.
this meeting's being recorded. Yahoo! So, it's a very good morning to you guys out there in BQ Press land. It is morning. And Alma obviously didn't check her email, or she would have seen that I sent her the good morning song.
I'm barely awake. Okay.
Hey, it's me and my dogs had a good dance to the good morning song. But it's no surprise right now that the world's in a little bit of conflict. Russia, 3 weeks ago, invaded the Ukraine. And I sat down and I started thinking about this. The Ukraine. You know, the Ukraine been a independent country since 1991 in the modern era. We hear Russia talking about the brotherhood of the with Ukraine, saying it's a traditional part of Russia. But you could just as easily talk about it being a traditional part of Poland. A real pain in the butt for Napoleon and the Nazis when they invaded Kiev. I grew up calling it Kiev, so if I slip and call it Kiev, please forgive me. And when they invaded, and now I've got to do more stuff like turn off my audio. There we go. Now, I have got some wonderful folks over here on the chat bar. So occasionally I'm going to make reference to them because they're watching us, and that'll mean I'm looking away while I'm doing that. So, anyway, I have with us a wonderful guest. I can still remember the moment I met this woman. I had read a book, bought it, liked it so much that I bought it for a friend. The Sisters of the, I can't pronounce it, Alma, so pronounce it for me.
If you mean the secrets of Jinshay.
Yeah, this sisterhood, the secrets of the Jinwei sisterhood.
Jinshay.
See how bad I am? I liked the book well enough I could never remember the title. And then I was talking with a friend of mine, Phyllis Radford, about it. And she said, well, she's going to be here at this convention. So I'm like, oh gosh, I get to be in a room with this famous author who wrote this beautiful little red book. So I walk in, I think it's Norwestcon. It's the hotel with the restaurant, has the stairs going right up outside the restaurant and inside the restaurant that are always crammed. And there is this elegant princess of a woman. Now, I was wrong, though. Alma Alexander is not a princess. Alma Alexander is a duchess, an accredited duchess, and she has papers to prove it. Now, what I liked about having a duchess is when I used to work at a little convention called RadCon here in the Tri-Cities, Washington, when when Alma started coming to us with us, um, we was able to set up tea with the Duchess. Now it started off at RadCon as a tiny little event, and I understand, Alma. Do you have other tea with the Duchess events at other cons?
Um, there was one or two, but it was very much a Radcom thing.
Well, our RadCon thing was that we loved having Alma, and I love having Alma on board because, not only is she one heck of a writer, but she teaches. She can help you. Do you still do teaching on writer? Teach people writing?
Yeah, I do.
And she is a wonderful go to the schools type person and help youthful children, young things. Like people only short uh, with their writing, and she's made some lifelong friends that way. If I understand, would that be correct, Alma?
I have one girl who was in one of the schools up in Pasco who literally asked for me every year for several years. She was in that school. When I was doing school visits, she would always run around to the library and ask for me specifically, which was kind of quite a compliment.
Ah, so I have a comment here from Theo Williams. It says Putin's quoting Hitlerian nonsense. It's all that Aryan people's rubbish being recycled. Yeah, I know. I'd hate to. Um, we're talking about the history of Ukraine. Turns out that Ukraine was settled something like according to the archaeologists, something like 25,000 years ago. There was a habitation there, but as you go forward, um, you'll find that as a city, Kiev was established roughly um, somewhere around 500 to 800 AD, and Ukraine was settled mostly by Vikings from Sweden. Did you know that, Alma?
That general part of the world was a crossroads of a sort for a lot of peoples and nations and nationalities. And you find some surprising legacies left behind where you least look for them.
Yes, I was surprised. I had never and those were the same people that founded Russia, or what I think that people were called. And I'm sure there are bright people on the with their search engines open that are going to tell me where I'm wrong. The Kievan Rus tribes came down. But anyway, what I find amazing is what Alma said. It was such a crossroads of people. The Now, were your ancestors, Alma? Where were they in all of this?
They were a little bit further to the side. Where I come from was even a worse crossroads. We were slap bang in the middle of the Magyars from the north and a swathe of Celts coming in from sideways, and the Romans ran over us with iron boots, and the Ottoman Turks came in from the south. And I mean, where I come from is a melting pot.
Did
But
you?
my own particular neck of the woods was just as antique as anything that was found in Ukraine and parts west.
Did
Um,
you? Did you have the Mongols come through too?
Pretty much, I don't think they made an impact. I don't think they came and stayed, but at least went through.
Yeah, that was a funny thing about the Mongols. I find them fascinating. They didn't always come and stay, but they did pass through with a vengeance. In fact, one of the stories you read about Kiev is, I guess, the people that occupy that area have a tradition of being kind of stubborn. Um, Genghis Khan, when he was going through, he'd pull up to the gates of the city, give them a chance to surrender, and if they surrendered, life was good. Maybe you know uh, uh, a minor incursion, to steal a phrase, but he would basically go on and then take their tribute from then on, and it kind of worked out for everybody. Now the garrison at the Ukraine at Kiev decided they didn't like that idea. So when his diplomats showed up and said, "Hey, you can either surrender and give us money, and we'll leave you be, or um, we'll, kill your men, ravage your women, sell your children into slavery, and ride your horses." Um, Turns out that the garrison took the guys, killed them, and when the army showed up, they threw them off the walls. Well, Genghis Khan, being having a wee bit of a temper, I'm told, broke down the walls, basically killed everybody, and then and this was 1200 something, and made an example that people as far east as Germany took note of, and a lot more cities surrendered and did not throw the Mongol ambassadors off of the walls. Uh-oh. Theo says, oh, he's quoting Putin again. That's Theo Williams. He's a brilliant intellect, and but I'm going to let Putin go for a bit. In fact, I've often thought if you could get him on a tall enough platform, that might be a good idea uh, to let him make his own decisions. Uh, However, and now, what in your experience growing up and hearing stories, where was Kiev and Ukraine in your culture? I mean, for you as a child, was it just part of Russia?
Pretty much.
Yeah,
When if you think about it in a sort of different kind of context, if you were in a United States context, uh, let's say that you were looking at something like Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania became a sovereign state and decided that it was independent. But the United States thinks of Pennsylvania as part of the origin story of the United States,
yeah,
which is partly where this is coming from, because you mentioned Kiev and Rus. I mean, this was the beginning of what became Russia. Russia kind of, the thing that we know as Russia started in Kiev. It was, people say, Kiev was a city before Moscow was a village in the swamps, which is true, but that's where it migrated, and that's where the Russian Empire kind of rooted. It started out as Kievan Rus. It started out in Kiev. It started out in that particular cradle over there. And look, this is the fact that anybody is going to war over territory in the 21st century is repugnant. It's just ridiculous. It's recidivist. I mean, we're going backwards as human beings.
yes.
But in one sense, the Russians are going there and saying, when you think about the more recent history, when you think about the Crimean War, when the Brits went to war in the Crimea, think about what the history books say. They went to war, the Crimea, against the Russians. The Russians were in the Crimea.
Yeah, and because you are correct. After, I mean, we can't have this discussion in general without needing Harry Turtledove, Dr. Harry Turtledove, Doctor of Byzantine Studies, um, the because you can't talk about what happens in the Ukraine without understanding Lithuanian history, Polish history, Russian history, Byzantine history. Uh, because if you think about Byzantium, If you went north, like in a V, you had Moscow on one side and Kiev on the other, that both were the primary and secondary outposts for the Byzantine culture, and when the Byzant or the Orthodox Church, and Kiev was not purely Catholic, but under that period of time, up until the 1400s, it was part of Poland, which was under a Catholic influence, and Moscow was under a Russia or the Greek Orthodox influence. The two city states did war with each other a fair amount. And then if I recall, it was the Cossacks that helped liberate Ukraine from, after you could say the Mongols did a lot of liberation for Ukraine. And then we, after that's where the Poles came in and the Lithuanians, because the Poles and the Lithuanians had a pretty big city state there. So it really all was kind of a mess until the 1600s when, if I recall,
history is kind of a mess.
History is a mess. I mean, I went down and looked and said, how many times has Kiev been burned? I mean, at least once or twice a century, they burned to the ground. I'm surprised that there's any buildings left in there. It's a tragic history, but where I was going with that is they did kind of cement a relationship with the Russians in the middle of the 1600s when the Cossacks, who were a lot of that came from the Ukrainian part of the world, became a big chunk of the Russian military for the next 400 years. So yeah, it's you can see the argument why Russia thinks the Ukraine is theirs, because where would Russia be without the Cossacks? They'd just be a bunch of people in furry hats without swords. Okay, I'm going to go to hell for that, I know. So, looking over at the comments. Well, yeah, Andrew's talking about Quebec leaving the European Confederation being somewhat similar, or the Canadian Confederation. I'm always curious why Canada was so eager to hold on to Quebec anyway. So they're talking about your cat. Tell us about your cat.
This is Blackjack. Say hello, Blackjack. He was a shelter rescue. I don't know if you can see, but ow! You can see that he has one cropped ear, which means that he was a street cat when he was born, and he was on the mean streets in his early kittenhood for the first 6 months. And it's a catch and release thing. They crop their ear, so he had a hard childhood. This thing. He's also half blind because one of his eyes is just congenitally dead. So when I went to get him at the shelter, he was essentially an imperfect cat who nobody wanted. But take a look at this little love bug. I don't know why nobody wanted him.
It's hard to say. I know this. So what everyone knows, and it's no secret. I can say it out loud. I hate cats, except for Roger. Roger's my old farm cat. He came with me when I sold the farm. He came to live with me, and I find him tolerable. Well, he is. He's orange, and he's tolerable. So we're in a quandary today. As we said, the Ukraine it's just been back and forth. It's been a doormat for everybody with an army for ages, while at the same time, oddly enough, being home to some of the fiercest warriors that were ever walked the planet. And I think that I don't know enough about where all the people are, but it's clear that the Ukrainian people that are living there today, whatever the national origin, are dedicated to their country. But and it is interesting that they've got a country that is so diverse in terms of, um, like you said, how do you pronounce it? The majors,
Magyars, the
major. Yeah,
Hungarians.
those are the Hungarian people. Then you've got the Ottomans, which fundamentally, there's a great book called The Great Game. That's the name of the book that talks about so much of the strife we have in the Middle East and in the world has been the Russian objective of achieving uh, ports on the Baltic, Lower Caucasus, and even in Turkey. And that's one of the reasons the British were fighting the Russians in Crimea, which, by the way, the Russians took away from the Tatars, um, which were leftover troops, I guess is not a best way of putting it, but left over from the Mongol invasion, along with some of the Turkish people from the Ottoman Empire that had occupied Crimea until, what did my notes say? Until a long time later. And the other thing to remember we said that Russia kind of took over Crimea, took over Ukraine in the 1600s, but they offered them autonomy. And then you know what happened? Catherine. Now, I don't know much about Catherine. They call her the Great. Wasn't it Catherine that had the Prime Minister Tompkin who had all the villages built for her?
Potemkin, yeah.
Oh,
Catherine was one of those people who were the example of, in my neck of the woods, you have a saying, I don't know how much it's going to come out in transliteration, but you can have somebody who is a zealot convert who is worse than the original person who they're trying to emulate. And the way we describe this in my neck of the woods is he's more Catholic than the Pope. Well, Catherine was more Catholic than the Pope in the sense that she was more Russian than the Russians, but she was actually German, right? She was a convert to the whole Russian thing, and she just took to it with a vengeance, and she basically just ran roughshod over everything because she had to prove to herself that she was Russian.
oh, sounds like Putin. Shall we call him Cather Putin? That would be bad.
Putin is a weird creature. I don't know if he even realizes it, but he's talking the talk, but he's basically what he has accomplished here. He's doing this, quote, for Russia. But what he has accomplished here is he's turned around and he stabbed Russia in the back. He has destroyed Russia.
Well, but he made himself almost the richest man in the world by some accounts by doing so.
Yeah, but he's standing in isolation as the richest man in the world. He has made Russia a name with which to curse. He has destroyed the country that gave the world Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and Pushkin and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, because nobody, people look at that and they said, oh, Russia's bad, Russia's evil, Russia's horrible. But Russia created some of the greatest art that, honestly, would you turn around and suddenly start, well, we're going to quit doing the Nutcracker ballet every Christmas because it's a great tradition, because it was written by a Russian.
Wasn't the first one you said? I believe Tchaikovsky was Ukrainian, by the way. I know you can throw the cat at me, but just don't hit your camera because I won't be able to see you. But no, I enjoyed I won't say I enjoyed the Nutcracker. Anybody who has built Nutcracker sets for their daughter as many times as I did, as a parent of a Nutcracker person, doesn't really like the Nutcracker. You just go because you love your daughter. But let's see what the comments are saying. Oh yes, here Ellen Killian, our local radical. You are a bit of a radical, Ellen, admit it. Is I don't think he's doing this for Russia. I think he believes he is Russia, and he is doing this for himself. We could do a whole show on the similarities between Trump and Putin.
Oh yeah, there's a reason why those two got along so well.
Yeah, Putin knew a useful idiot when he saw one. And you remember what apparently Trump liked about Putin? He could have anybody he wanted killed. Could you imagine Donald Trump in power with that kind of authority?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it wouldn't be bad. I mean, millionaires would be safe, or billionaires, but the rest of us might have to quake in our boots occasionally. The
There was a quote that I saw recently. I don't know who said it, but it said the comfort of the rich depends on an abundant supply of the poor.
Oh God, yes. I mean, when you consider how much each person has to produce, how much does each Russian have to produce to make the oligarchs as wealthy as they are, or how much does each American have to produce to make the Koch brothers, or pick any of our American oligarchs? And I can say American oligarchs because there are those that would have us become an oligarchy, or a kleptocracy, which is the next step after oligarchy.
I think where Putin is basically sitting is that he has got these delusions of grandeur that he would like things to be very much back to where the Soviet Union was a linchpin in the world's historical makeup, and he would very much like to be Stalin, but he's not.
Yeah. Well, he's working on it. Stalin killed 4 million Ukrainians. Um, and if we let Putin have his sway and don't do something,
The man has a twisted version of what it means to be great, and he's very much working towards accomplishing it to the detriment of everything around him.
well, I think the president of the Ukraine said that the Russians will suffer for years under this legacy, or generations.
Yeah, basically that's what I said. He's basically decided to go at this quote for Russia, but he's destroyed Russia. Russia is not going to rise from these ashes for a long time, if ever.
Well, I just hope that they don't stop performing the Nutcracker. And so now an interesting thing that's come up, and I will look to the crowd who are commenting over here. Hey, Roberta, good to see you. Roberta says we should also remember that I lost her. Who is Sergei Prokofiev? Steve? Anybody? Okay, that's a comment in there from Roberta. Having to admit that I suffer an American education, where the Roman Empire ended when Rome fell, and nothing east of the Channel was very important. And when it was very important, it was only because of the wars involving America. And we never learned of anything much east of Poland. And the fact that the Byzantine Empire continued for 1,000 years as the Roman Empire, preserving all the culture of Greece and the religious iconography of the Orthodox Church, before there was even a Catholic Church, which is why I mentioned Harry Turtledove. He's really smart in this area. That I was shocked when I went and read all about Byzantium. So my knowledge of this is much self-taught research, whatever. So don't, if I'm wrong, blame my professor. Um, and if Alma's wrong, no, Alma's never wrong.
Oh, please.
Oh, please, you've been wrong. Okay. Oh, Peter and the Wolf. The guy who wrote Peter and the Wolf was Ukrainian. He's the guy that they talked about naming the airport after, that the Russians have bombed to dust and ashes. But the my God, I'm having more fun reading the comments. There's a button I can push at some point where I bring comments on the screen, but I don't know how to do it on the broadcast. But they're all there for people watching. Lucky people. But anyway, so Alma has made a good point. We are doing, I think even Putin called it cancel culture on the Russians. There is too much beauty in art and culture for us to say, if it's Russian music, we're not going to play it. If it's Russian culture, we're not going to hear of it. Because at the same time, we're canceling some of those during that period of time between 1650 and 1920, when the Ukraine was under the thumb of the Tsars. A whole lot of beautiful music came out. And I did notice something else as I was researching this. The Ukraine always seemed to be ahead of Russia. When Russia was trying to industrialize, they were very effective in doing it in the Ukraine, where they had European influences. But the further west you got, the harder it got and the less effective it got. You know, the first guy to invent a helicopter, the guy who invented the helicopter, I guess it flew the first one in Kiev. Do you know that, Alma?
No.
Oh, hey, it is amazing what 2 days of researching trivia can do for you. Now, you see, Alma and I weren't supposed to be the heavyweights. We had a heavyweight scheduled, or at least a middleweight. And so me, I get to be the lightweight here. Alma's the middleweight, and so we're muddling along as best we can. But the thing is, I guess it really comes back to it. Russia is not completely wrong when they talk about seeing Kiev as essentially a part of Russia, because it is what people believe it is. And if a whole 2 generations of Russians have been raised believing that Kiev is part of Russia, then that is the belief system, and it fundamentally becomes a level of reality. You go back into the 20s, I was looking at some old language. 40% of the Ukrainians, after the Russians had been, the Russification of the Ukraine had been taking place, still spoke primarily Ukrainian. Only half of the population spoke Russian, and well enough to register as being able to speak Russian. And then you still had the percentage speaking Belarus, yes, that language. And then you had 12% spoke Yiddish. I was surprised at how much of a Jewish population that was present in Kiev. Now, where did the movie Fiddler on the Roof, out there in my crowdsourcing comment section, take place? Anybody remember? Was it in Poland, uh, Russia,
Russia,
Ukraine?
Russia, I think.
Yeah, my
I know
granddaughter.
the movie was actually filmed. The actual literal movie was filmed. The visual imagery in the movie was filmed more or less in my own neck of the woods, and I know this because nowhere else do we have such mud.
Mud. Ah, yes, the bane of the Russian war machine and Napoleon's war machine and the German war machine. War machines in general hate mud.
The West has learned a new word recently, which I and mine have known for many years, but the West has just learned a new word in Russian called Rasputitsa. And Rasputitsa literally means, it doesn't have a transliteration, but it means basically what happens when during certain times of the year, especially now, straight post after great winter, when everything is melting, and the roads are the only real thing that is solid. Everything else is this morass of sucking mud. And Rasputitsa really means off the road. Once you get off the road, you're dead. You're sunk. You can't move. There's so much deep sucking mud that anything that is got moving parts is basically bogged down and stuck there. And I think that's part of the reason that the Russian tanks are having so much trouble, because they're getting stuck in this Rasputitsa. They get off the road and they're dead. They're dead in the water. They can't move again.
Yeah, I guess some of it's thought over there. Yeah, that 40-mile long convoy uh, isn't having much luck when they get off the road, but the foot traffic of people with uh, packing a javelin missile on their back are not having near the problems. Um,
Yeah,
somebody,
you can walk across you can walk across terrain that you can't drive across, but it's still not going to be pleasant. Uh, in times of year, when the post melt times of year, when, I mean, this is a part of the world where snow is a thing. I mean, it's not something like, it snowed yesterday and it's going to be gone tomorrow. No, when it snows in that part of the world, it snows and then it stays snowed for a long time. And when that snow melts, and there's a lot of it, it just goes, it has to go somewhere. So we have a particular species of mud in that general geographic area, which eats things. If you try to walk through it and you step the wrong way, you're going to leave your shoe in the mud and step out of it, because the mud won't let go of it that easily.
what have you done to that cat?
The cat is very vocal. He just wants me right now, so he's yelling.
And I can understand, given the circumstances, the um, the yeah. There's a was I think it was Napoleon. I mean, I sometimes think part of the bad day for the Ukraine. Again, I could go through there and start, saying that, yep, Ukraine was got destroyed. 1205 got destroyed. 1240 got burned to the ground. 1325 burned again. Oh, looks about doing pretty good until about 1482 when it got burned again. Uh, it's kind of a rough place to live. Uh, and the To give you another sense, to tell you, I made some notes that I thought I found interesting. An 1812 census, back when America was writing its first great overture. Oh, come on, that deserves more than a Alma.
Yes, I know what you did there. Yes, I know what you did
Okay.
there.
Oh my God, the scariest words. But they took a poll, and this is a pun, in
You're full of them there.
and found out that there were 40,000 Polish noble families living in Kiev, as opposed to 1,000 Russian noble families. Uh, that gives you an idea. I mean, to this day, you look across and say, why are the Poles being so open to the Ukrainians? Well, I think if you go back and look in history, you'll find that the Poles um, have been more brothers, more linked, and have spent equal amount of time with Poland in their um, as part of their country than did Russia. Russia basically had to force migration in an effort to make Poland more, or make Kiev and the Ukraine more Russian, whereas the Poles were freely intermixed because the Polish Lithuanian country had ruled it had settled. I mean, it was a natural migration. Um, Now, what was interesting about this is of the how it's all settled out is the Poles were Catholics.
Yep,
Now,
very much.
I don't have a real problem with Catholics. I mean, they have every bit as much legitimacy for their beliefs as do the Russian Orthodox Church. Uh, Both of them believe in invisible men in the sky, and okay. The But that was part of what drove the wedge, a wedge between Poland and the Ukrainians, and especially the Cossacks, because the Cossacks believed themselves to be the army of God, kind of like think about Charlemagne for the Catholic Church. That's where the Cossacks came in for the Russian Orthodoxy, in my perception. I'm willing to have plenty of people tell me I'm wrong, which might happen, and I'll be off the air by then. So neener, neener, neener. The It's just um, really interesting, and then that helped when the Russians kind of helped recognize Cossacks, and the Cossacks go become part of the Russian myth. When I don't mean a myth. Cossacks were very real. You know how the Cossacks got their start? Basically, like Florida did. You know, anybody who could run away from being a serf or get out of the uh, bondage, etc., moved to this portion down there by the Black Sea where um, they didn't have to be a serf, and wow, or didn't have to put up with the Catholics' overlords. And then gradually, that's when they migrated towards the Russian influence, became part of the Russian military, and then for, like I said, between 1600 and to recent years, the Cossacks have been associated with Russia, but even to the point where they were fighting in Germany. And when Europeans first started encountering the Cossacks in large groups was in the 1850s, I think, when they were fighting the Ottomans, and it spread over to Germany. How far off am I there, Alma?
Yeah, it's how much time have you got for this, Bob? I mean, this part of history gets twisted and convoluted and complicated, and once you start following individual threads, you kind of start pulling out things.
I know. Okay, tell you what. Let's take it forward. We had World War One, the bad day. Um, Russia had a civil war. They surrendered. Actually, Germany occupied Ukraine for a while. The German troops were in Kiev, and Kiev thought they were independent. And then, as the Bolshevik Revolution continued, I think it was 1920, when Kiev got pretty well finally conquered for the last time. That's what my thesis said. And then it went all the way forward. Along came Ronald Reagan and single-handedly beat Boris Yeltsin in an arm wrestling match. And so the Soviet Union ended. You didn't hear that version of history?
Not until now, no.
Oh man, you should read the. It's right there. I got a copy. It's my Republican history book. I keep it on the shelf. Uh, that's a joke, Alma.
All 2 pages of it? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, anyway, and so there, boom, and then we have the Stalinization efforts that he really turned the. Let's see how many Ukrainians we can starve to death and make room for Russians. The industrialization of the Ukraine, which actually went fairly well, and then World War II happened, and Ukraine got declared a hero city by the Russians because they managed to slow up the Hitler. Now, I've read in another version, Churchill, that said that the Ukrainians welcomed the Germans as liberators right at first, until they found out that no, they weren't liberators. They had a policy that said anybody who was not part of the war effort was an extraneous mouth to feed and let them starve, and then killed in Babi Yar, Baba Yar,
Bobby
uh,
Yar,
executed 33,000 Jews, and then another 60,000 Romani, Ukrainian intellectuals, and anybody else that basically didn't agree. And tragedy. And so the bloom was off the rose very quickly. But then we go forward until that point where in 1991, where Ukraine became independent. So that is, uh-oh, somebody gave me an opinion. It isn't only an opinion. They say we need to define the, and then they don't say. Thank you, Andrew J. Lucas. Give me part of a comment. You know, I read these things. Every time somebody gets to look at my ear, they see that. And Putin, Julian says Putin invaded the Ukraine with the backing of the oligarchs. Yeah, he also invaded Georgia with the backing of the oligarchs. He took Crimea with the backing of the oligarchs. Now, I don't know how to make this argument, because how do you make an argument that one people belong to another? Because I am sure there are the people of Crimea that we know very little of if you're relying on the news, and I have done very little research. I don't know what the general consensus of Crimea is about whether or not they want to be part of Russia or not. I don't know what the general opinion of the separatist parts are. I mean, it's hard to get terribly sanctimonious when America killed about 1 million of our own to keep the southern states from breaking away. But there was as with Crimea and the separatist areas, there's a lot more.
There's a certain amount of national cohesion which gets threatened by certain things. I mean, if you take a situation which is currently on the ground, which is that there is a great many expat Cubans in Florida, and particularly around Miami, and what would happen if those Cubans now decided that they had sufficient numbers on the ground that they wished to secede and declare themselves part of Cuba, because, you know, they're as close to Cuba as they are to anywhere else. I mean, the United States isn't going to sit back and say, okay, goodbye, nice knowing you. They've got a claim on, however tenuous a claim, given that the native populations were sort of Seminoles, so they kind of have a claim too. But the United States is going to say, no, Florida is ours, and we're going to damn well fight you for it.
Yeah, we stole it from the Spanish fair and square.
The thing about territory is that the thing about land is that it doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land.
That's a good thing. I think it was Crazy Horse One of my great joys in life is every time I'm going anywhere close to a cross country, I detour uh, down to where the Crazy Horse Memorial. I mean, I've seen it go from a pile of rocks to the head of Crazy Horse and his horse's back, and his statement that has always struck with me is, "My land is where my people lie buried." Uh, when your ancestors are buried on a piece of real estate, you tend to think of it as yours. And there
Which
are many ancestors of many people buried in the Ukraine.
there are a lot of people buried in a lot of places. This is why it was so absolutely awful back in what used to be Yugoslavia, when a certain part of the country essentially decided to expel a certain ethnicity, and those people were on the road carrying what they could carry, including the bones of their ancestors whom they dug out of the places where they were buried. Like you said, the places where my ancestors are buried is my land, but that didn't work. The people who were in charge at the time, they're basically saying you're out, and the people who were out carried their dead with them. And what was really appalling is that the modern media, sometimes in pursuit of a story, is completely oblivious to what the story actually is. I've seen people from Western reporters rushing up to these, I wouldn't even call them refugees. I don't know what they were. They were exiles. They just lost everything. They just lost even the ground where their dead were buried in, because their graves were being carried on their backs like snails. And rushing up to these people on the roads and shoving a microphone in their faces and saying, "What are you feeling?" As in, what am I supposed to be feeling? Who am I? Who am I? Where am I going? And what is going to happen to me? Because I am now adrift in time. I'm adrift in place. I'm adrift in history. I'm carrying my bones with me, and I don't belong anywhere anymore. Things like this have been happening on the ground in a lot of places in Europe. I think America is too young to understand, to be perfectly honest.
Well, we're young, but we're also isolated. Um, I mean, we don't have the memories of my great grandfather telling me stories of Napoleon marching through, or World War One or World War Two, or the. I mean, I we have stories of World War Two from, but it is all took place in other places. It's the men bringing the stories back for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. You don't understand what is going on the ground in Kiev right now, because, well, to be blunt about it, you've never been bombed. I mean, the reason why 9/11 left such a scar on the national psyche is that it was possibly the only time that something like that happened on the American mainland in full view of its people. You don't know what city rubble looks like. You've never experienced it. You don't know what it feels like to scurry around like rats trying to find food where you can, because there's no food anywhere, because everything has been destroyed, because you never experienced it. America sent its armies to both world wars, and they fought in an older part of the world, and they brought back the stories. But they also were the people who brought chocolate and nylon stockings and such luxuries to the war ground zero, because they came from the lush oh my god, I haven't had my coffee this morning, the lush rich lands from where the war had never touched. They had the backing of a nation which was whole. They were sent from America into a war zone, and they went there and they fought and they came back and they told stories. But the American people, the American heartland, was never touched by that war.
That is true. I mean, we haven't been touched by war since the Civil War, and
Yeah, And,
And
that was long before you had the things that could just, that was long before the missiles and the bombs and what have you. The Civil War burned things. The Civil War blew up things with dynamite, but the Civil War didn't have the Blitz.
no, but the South still remembers Sherman fondly.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
But no, it was, yeah. But if you look back on our own Civil War, it'll just give you a sense of how much of an impression to be the country, the land where the battles were fought, impacted the people, so that 100 years later, they still talk of it. And you add 10 centuries and more recent tragedies to that in the Ukraine, and yeah, it's the blood is going to be bad for generations. And I don't know what will ever be done about it. But guys, let me say this. I thank Alma immensely for coming and talking with us. And I love your cat, even though I don't like cats. And I hope he keeps hanging around with you to keep you strong. Uh-oh, she's typing. And as we go through, I'd like to remind you that Alma is a very incredible writer. You wrote, you put out an anthology not too long ago where the benefits went to assist refugees, correct?
That's what I was just typing. It's up in the comments. You can see it now.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go grab that and put that.
It just let me just say that the origins of that anthology was back when we had the quote ban on Muslims and all that. It sort of stretches back from that. And the thing about refugees in modern times is that they are being televised. The thing about refugees is that they've always been with us. There's always been people who have been driven from places because other people decided that they shouldn't be there. But for a long time, it was something that happened behind the curtain, behind the screen, and you didn't know about it because it was happening over there somewhere, and you didn't know about what was going on. Until all of a sudden the media were everywhere, and all of a sudden it was right in front of you, and you could see the suffering that was happening of the people who were running from cold wars or hot wars, or generally being dispossessed of land, of memories, of history, of culture, of everything, and just drifting in a no man's land of not knowing where they belong. So what came out of that is a book by refugees, sometimes about refugees, and what was the purpose of it was children of a different sky. Basically the quote there is, they change their sky, not their soul, who run across the sea. What I did was I put together a collection of stories with that theme, and the proceeds from the sales were going to two separate refugee entities, groups that were working with refugees, one internationally, one within the United States. And what I can do, go on.
Is that distribution still active?
Yeah, but the sales have dropped off recently. But listen, I'll tell you what I will do. If you put that thing up, that's where you can get, I've given you a place where you can go get it. From now until July, until my birthday, whatever gets sold of that book, I'm going to find a place that deals with Ukraine, and I'm going to send the proceeds to them.
Okay.
Just for that time.
So every one of you people who's watching this, commenting on that, go find that link. Take what Alma has said, put it out on your page, and say that if they buy this book, they're getting the stories from refugees, and then they can raise money for refugees by buying a book that they get to sell, or get to read. I mean, and so I would like to see this book get bumped, and by getting it bumped, because Alma's never done a bad product in her life, not that I know of, and so you're not going to be disappointed. It's for an incredible cause, and so let's do that for Alma. Now, doing the business part of B Cubed, we are next Sunday is going to be the last Sunday of the month. And so that means that next week we have David Gerald and Jim Wright in to talk to us about whatever the heck they want to talk to us about, because I have found that when I'm on screen with those two, the best position for my mouth is shut. And Alma's thinking that she can add examples to when that's probably the best position. I understand. But I would like to say thank you, Alma, for coming. It's a hard day for you, I know. And you're it's really good. So here so goodbye from B Cube. Say goodbye, Alma.
Goodbye.
Okay.